Sir, either move to economy or get off the plane. You're making the real passengers uncomfortable. Jennifer Brooks said it with a tight smile. But there was no kindness behind her voice. She stood tall, arms crossed, staring down at James Carter in seat 1A like he was an intruder. A man in a gray t-shirt and jeans didn't fit her idea of a VIP. James met her eyes calmly, but around him, judgment crackled in the air. Passengers stared, phones came out, and when the cuffs clicked around his wrists, no one stood up, no one asked questions. But within 24 hours, that moment, those 12 words, would ignite a corporate wildfire. The airline would fall, and a billionaire in sneakers would rise to change the future of flight. Before we go any further, where are you watching from today? If this story hits close to home, don't forget to subscribe. There's more where this came from. And more importantly, have you ever faced something like this? Drop your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Jennifer didn't stop there. Your outfit alone is a violation of protocol, she added, her voice ringing across the first-class cabin like she was reading from a script written in entitlement. We maintain a premium experience for premium passengers. Her tone made it clear. James, a black man dressed simply, didn't belong in her vision of luxury. She gestured toward his jeans with a dismissive flick. Sir, economy is back there. This section is reserved for guests who meet our standards. James didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or shift in his seat. He looked her in the eye and said, I have a confirmed seat. You're out of line. His voice was even, but every word carried a quiet thunder. In seat 1C, Sarah Davis, his executive assistant, was already tapping the screen of her phone, hitting record. She knew what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not an error, but a moment that mirrored 1,000 others, in boardrooms, offices, hotel lobbies, where appearance outweighed substance and perception wielded more power than truth. Just behind them, in seat 2A, Michael Turner, COO of Brightstar Capital, had already opened a secure email draft. His pulse quickened, not from surprise, but from the weight of watching something old and ugly unfold again. From the galley. Robert Hayes arrived like backup. Broad shoulders, stiff jaw, voice inflated with self-importance. You need to vacate that seat now, sir, or we'll have security escort you from the plane. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't look at James's boarding pass. You're not registered as a verified first-class traveler in our system, he added. You could be a fraud. James reached into his wallet and retrieved a sleek, Black Horizon Priority Elite card. His name gleamed across the metal surface. James Carter. That's me, he said. You might want to double-check the ownership structure of this airline before throwing around that word. Robert looked unimpressed. Jennifer leaned over, tapped something on her tablet, and announced, Seat 1A is now marked ineligible. System override complete. James exhaled slowly, then turned to Sarah. Save this, he said softly. All of it. Sarah gave a firm nod, camera steady. Jennifer stepped back, but her voice rose, loud enough for the rest of the cabin to hear. We've had incidents before, she said. People sneaking up here pretending to be someone they're not. We're just doing our job. Around them, passengers exchanged glances, some intrigued, others amused. One man in 3A whispered, This is gonna be good, lifting his phone for a better angle. James leaned back in his seat, hands on his lap, posture dignified. You're not doing your job, he said clearly. You're profiling a paying customer based on how I look. The air thickened. Then came the heavy footsteps of Officer Laura Thompson, entering with 2 JFK airport security agents. Jennifer didn't waste a breath. That's him, she said, pointing with no hesitation. He's being disruptive. Disruptive how? The officer asked. He refuses to leave a seat he doesn't belong in, Jennifer replied. He's interfering with our boarding process. James turned to the officer. Seat 1A was assigned to me. I bought it, and I own 40% of Horizon Air. Do you have ID? Laura asked. Driver's license, and shareholder documentation is a phone call away. He's not dressed like a VIP, Jennifer interjected. He doesn't fit the profile. Those last words, said with a calm cruelty, silenced everything. Sarah's eyes flashed. Michael finished his email and hit send. Officer Thompson hesitated. The passengers weren't laughing anymore. Still, orders were orders. She motioned for the cuffs. James stood slowly. His hands were steady. His voice didn't waver. This will be the last time anyone ever does this to me. The cuffs clicked, sharp and final. Sarah captured every moment. The way the other flight attendants averted their eyes, the flash of Jennifer's satisfaction, the silence of passengers who knew this felt wrong but said nothing. As James was led down the aisle, he turned back one final time and spoke not to Jennifer, not to Robert, but to the cabin. Don't forget what you saw here. Don't pretend this didn't happen. Then he disappeared behind the curtain, in the stillness that followed. Sarah uploaded the video to the secure Brightstar server. Michael was already on the phone with legal, and in a quiet corner of the terminal. James sat with his back to the glass, the cuffs now removed, his wrists red but his mind burning. He scrolled through memories that felt like bruises. 1995, Wall Street, in a conference room where men in suits laughed at his second-hand blazer and called him eager, like it was an insult. That humiliation had forged Brightstar Capital. He remembered their smirks, their eyes, their words. And now here he was again, 30 years later, in a billion-dollar suit of his own making, but stripped of it, in the eyes of the people on that plane, by a t-shirt and skin. Sarah sat beside him. We've got everything, she said. Her voice, his override, the whole thing. James nodded. Good, he said quietly. Let's begin. He opened his phone and typed a single sentence to Horizon's CEO. Review Brooks. 7 strikes are enough. Rebecca Foster replied less than 2 minutes later. Reviewing now. The first crack had formed. The cabin of Horizon Air Flight HA-456 trembled, not from turbulence, but from the tension brewing inside. James Carter had just been removed in handcuffs, but his presence still pulsed through every inch of the first-class cabin. Seat 1A sat empty, but eyes kept darting to it. The silence left behind wasn't peace. It was a vacuum of moral failure. Jennifer Brooks adjusted her blouse. Feigning composure as she returned to the galley, Robert Hayes leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his smugness starting to curdle into worry. Passengers were getting uncomfortable, Jennifer whispered. I did what needed to be done. But Kevin Brown, a junior flight attendant, had been watching everything. You didn't just remove a man, he said under his breath. You humiliated someone who belonged there. Jennifer turned on him with a snap. Watch your tone. I'll report insubordination if I have to. Kevin said nothing, but his hands trembled as he quietly opened his work tablet and began writing a confidential memo. Forwarded straight to HR and time-stamped for later. Meanwhile, in the terminal, James sat beside Sarah and reviewed the video. The clarity was shocking, Jennifer's voice ringing out. He doesn't belong in first class, Robert's sneering comment. He's not a real VIP. David Miller, the captain himself, heard in the background chuckling. T-shirt and sneakers. Must have wandered up here by accident. James's jaw tightened as Sarah clipped the footage, uploaded it to the Brightstar cloud, and began drafting the email to legal counsel. But back on board, The drama wasn't over. As boarding continued, Jennifer stood by seat 1A, ensuring it remained empty. When one passenger asked if the flight would be delayed, she responded, "No, the issue's been handled. Some people think they can buy a ticket and skip into our highest tier. Not on my watch." The woman nodded, but the man beside her, a tech consultant from San Francisco, frowned. "That man looked familiar," he murmured. "He's not just anyone." Jennifer ignored him, but her nerves twitched. Robert, now leaning over a crew console, muttered to her, "We need to lock this down. No more talk. Delete anything on the system." Jennifer's eyes scanned the cabin. "Too many phones," she said. "Too late." Kevin, now seated on his crew jump seat, tapped his device again, forwarding Jennifer's request to suppress evidence to Brightstar's internal ethics team. At that moment, Michael Turner, still seated in 2A, received it. His pulse kicked. Within seconds, he forwarded the memo and screenshots of Sarah's video upload to the board of Horizon Air. One line included, "Attempted cover-up in progress. Passenger in question, James Carter, up in the cockpit. David Miller received a direct call from operations." "What's going on with the passenger removal?" asked the dispatcher. David, still smirking, replied, "Just some guy who didn't belong in first class." The dispatcher's voice changed. "That guy is James Carter. The James Carter." A long silence followed. "CEO Brightstar Capital. Major shareholder." David went pale. "He didn't say that." The dispatcher was silent for a moment. Then, "Well, he did. And now the board knows." Back in the terminal, Sarah's email had landed. James opened his laptop. "They've just triggered the override on my seat from the crew tablet," he said. "It's on the log. Time-stamped. We can cross-reference it with their roster," Sarah said. "All of it will line up." James nodded. "We'll let the evidence speak first." Back on the plane, Jennifer's voice rose again, this time directed at Kevin. "Why are you sitting? We're not done." Kevin stood. "You're making a mistake. That man owns a stake in this airline." "Not our concern," Robert cut in. "He was disrupting the flow. He was sitting in his seat." Kevin replied, "You all assumed he didn't belong because of how he looked." Silence fell around them. A few passengers now turned in their seats. Someone was filming. Jennifer's eyes flared. "You're out of line." "No," Kevin said. "You are." As the flight pushed back from the gate, tension thickened. Meanwhile, Michael forwarded Kevin's comments and footage from another passenger. Someone had already uploaded part of the incident to social media. The title read, "Black man removed from first class for wearing a t-shirt?" And it was gaining views. Fast. James received it, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Let it breathe." He knew what was coming. The system had picked the wrong man this time. As the flight reached cruising altitude, David Miller got a message from Horizon's CEO. "I need full incident details." Now, he looked at Jennifer. "We might be in trouble." Jennifer folded her arms. "I did nothing wrong." Robert looked sick. "He said he owned 40%. David's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if he's telling the truth?" But it was already too late for caution. The dominoes had started falling. In a quiet HR office at Horizon Air's headquarters, 3 alerts lit up: 7 prior complaints against Jennifer Brooks, 3 naming Robert, 2 naming David, all marked inconclusive by an old compliance manager who had since been terminated. But now, with video, timestamps, and a high-profile victim, they were being reopened. Simultaneously, FAA staffers at LaGuardia and Dallas received a flagged update: potential violation of passenger rights under shareholder policy. By the time the plane landed, James would be trending. His name would be on headlines. And the seat no one believed he deserved would become the most expensive misjudgment in airline history. The cabin of Horizon Air Flight HA-456 trembled, not from turbulence, but from the tension brewing inside. James Carter had just been removed in handcuffs, but his presence still pulsed through every inch of the first-class cabin. Seat 1A sat empty, but eyes kept darting to it. The silence left behind wasn't peace. It was a vacuum of moral failure. Jennifer Brooks adjusted her blouse, feigning composure as she returned to the galley. Robert Hayes leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his smugness starting to curdle into worry. Passengers were getting uncomfortable, Jennifer whispered. I did what needed to be done. But Kevin Brown, a junior flight attendant, had been watching everything. You didn't just remove a man, he said under his breath. You humiliated someone who belonged there. Jennifer turned on him with a snap. Watch your tone. I'll report insubordination if I have to. Kevin said nothing, but his hands trembled as he quietly opened his work tablet and began writing a confidential memo, forwarded straight to HR and time-stamped for later. Meanwhile, in the terminal, James sat beside Sarah and reviewed the video. The clarity was shocking, Jennifer's voice ringing out. He doesn't belong in first class, Robert's sneering comment. He's not a real VIP. David Miller, the captain himself, heard in the background chuckling. T-shirt and sneakers, must have wandered up here by accident. James's jaw tightened as Sarah clipped the footage, uploaded it to the Bright Star cloud, and began drafting the email to legal counsel. But back on board, the drama wasn't over. As boarding continued, Jennifer stood by seat 1A, ensuring it remained empty. When one passenger asked if the flight would be delayed, she responded, No, the issue's been handled. Some people think they can buy a ticket and skip into our highest tier. Not on my watch. The woman nodded, but the man beside her, a tech consultant from San Francisco, frowned. That man looked familiar, he murmured. He's not just anyone. Jennifer ignored him, but her nerves twitched. Robert, now leaning over a crew console, muttered to her. We need to lock this down. No more talk. Delete anything on the system. Jennifer's eyes scanned the cabin. Too many phones, she said. Too late. Kevin, now seated on his crew jump seat, tapped his device again, forwarding Jennifer's request to suppress evidence to Bright Star's internal ethics team. At that moment, Michael Turner, still seated in 2A, received it. His pulse kicked. Within seconds, he forwarded the memo and screenshots of Sarah's video upload to the board of Horizon Air. One line included, attempted cover-up in progress. Passenger in question, James Carter, up in the cockpit. David Miller received a direct call from operations. What's going on with the passenger removal? Asked the dispatcher. David, still smirking, replied, Just some guy who didn't belong in first class. The dispatcher's voice changed. That guy is James Carter. The James Carter. A long silence followed. CEO, Bright Star Capital. Major shareholder. David went pale. He didn't say that. The dispatcher was silent for a moment. Then, well, he did. And now the board knows. Back in the terminal. Sarah's email had landed. James opened his laptop. They've just triggered the override on my seat from the crew tablet, he said. It's on the log, time-stamped. We can cross-reference it with their roster. Sarah said. All of it will line up. James nodded. We'll let the evidence speak first. Back on the plane, Jennifer's voice rose again, this time directed at Kevin. Why are you sitting? We're not done. Kevin stood. You're making a mistake. That man owns a stake in this airline. Not our concern. Robert cut in. He was disrupting the flow. He was sitting in his seat. Kevin replied. You all assumed he didn't belong because of how he looked. Silence fell around them. A few passengers now turned in their seats. Someone was filming. Jennifer's eyes flared. "You're out of line." "No," Kevin said. "You are." As the flight pushed back from the gate, tension thickened. Meanwhile, Michael forwarded Kevin's comments and footage from another passenger. Someone had already uploaded part of the incident to social media. The title read, "Black man removed from first class for wearing a t-shirt," and it was gaining views. Fast. James received it, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Let it breathe." He knew what was coming. The system had picked the wrong man this time. As the flight reached cruising altitude, David Miller got a message from Horizon's CEO. "I need full incident details. Now." He looked at Jennifer. "We might be in trouble." Jennifer folded her arms. "I did nothing wrong." Robert looked sick. "He said he owned 40%. David's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if he's telling the truth?" But it was already too late for caution. The dominoes had started falling. In a quiet HR office at Horizon Air's headquarters, 3 alerts lit up. 7 prior complaints against Jennifer Brooks, 3 naming Robert, 2 naming David, all marked inconclusive by an old compliance manager who had since been terminated. But now, with video, timestamps, and a high-profile victim, they were being reopened simultaneously. FAA staffers at LaGuardia and Dallas received a flagged update, potential violation of passenger rights under shareholder policy. By the time the plane landed, James would be trending. His name would be on headlines, and the seat no one believed he deserved would become the most expensive misjudgment in airline history. Officer Laura Thompson's voice crackled through the airport radio. "Passenger Carter detained. Incident escalating. Requesting supervisor at gate 16. Inside the terminal holding room, James sat composed, wrists marked red where the cuffs had gripped. But his spirit wasn't bruised. It was sharpening. The quiet room held tension like a loaded spring. Sarah sat beside him. Uploading the second clip, Robert Hayes tossing James's shareholder card aside like trash. Jennifer muttering, "He's not one of us," and Captain David Miller chuckling over the intercom. "Can't buy class with sneakers." All of it was time-stamped, backed up, and already sent to Bright Star's legal team. Outside, the cabin door remained sealed, but the tension inside was suffocating. Kevin Brown, still seated in his jump seat, stared down the aisle in disbelief. Robert had just instructed Jennifer to delete any internal logs related to the override. "We'll say it was a system error," he whispered. "He won't be back anyway." But he was wrong, because James wasn't going away quietly. In fact, he was already emailing the top legal reporter at the Wall Street Journal, attaching the video with a one-line message. "This is how a shareholder gets treated on Horizon Air." And just like that, the press had it. Back on the plane, the mood soured. Passengers who once chuckled began whispering anxiously. A man in 3A checked Twitter. "Hey," he muttered to his seatmate. "That guy? That was James Carter. The James Carter, Bright Star, fintech guy. He owns part of Horizon." A quiet wave of guilt rolled down the cabin. Someone stood and confronted Jennifer. "Is this true?" She froze. "We're not authorized to discuss personnel or shareholder matters in flight," she said stiffly. "Now please return to your seat." But it was too late. Kevin tapped into the crew messaging portal and sent a full report, complete with quotes, "Passenger was removed for appearance," and "Captain supported false justification." He CC'd HR and the Ethics Committee, marking it urgent, discrimination protocol breach. At that same moment, Sarah received a text from Michael. "I pulled the audit logs. They've been overriding seat assignments based on appearance risk tags for over a year." James looked up slowly. "That's the algorithm they use to profile passengers?" Sarah nodded grimly. Looks like it. I'm seeing at least 12 flagged incidents, all with passengers of color. Same pattern, same override command, Jennifer at the center of it every time. James exhaled through his nose. Then we go wide. He opened his encrypted press line and attached the memo, including internal emails, override logs, and the voice recording of Jennifer saying, "He doesn't belong in this cabin." Within 5 minutes, ABC News had it. Within 10, it hit national trending. Horizon Air was in freefall, and the plane hadn't even left the ground. Up front, David Miller was reading the message from Rebecca Foster, Horizon's CEO. "If this incident is real, we're looking at full-scale crisis. Find out what's happening. Now." But David didn't have answers. He only had exposure. He turned to Robert. "We need to reach legal. That video's spreading." Robert, sweaty and pale, whispered, "Maybe we can issue a joint statement. Say he misrepresented himself?" "We're past that," Kevin said coldly, stepping into the aisle. "He told you who he was. You ignored him. You mocked him. You restrained him. And you did it all while cameras were rolling." Jennifer spun around. "He didn't look like a shareholder. That's not our fault." "Yes," Kevin said, voice tight with fury. "It is." Meanwhile, back at Bright Star HQ, Michael tapped into the financial back end. What he found made his blood run cold. Horizon Air had over $900 million in undisclosed debt, hidden beneath maintenance deferrals, falsified reporting on fuel costs, and a bogus surplus projection. "They're cooked," he whispered. "This goes way beyond PR." He forwarded the findings to James, who stared at the screen in silence for a moment before replying. "Prepare a report for the FAA," Sarah added. "We should copy in the Department of Transportation. This isn't just discrimination, it's fraud." James nodded. "Send everything. Time to bring sunlight." And just like that, the leverage flipped. Horizon had gone from arrogant to cornered, from powerful to exposed. As the plane finally taxied for takeoff, the news broke on CNN. Major Horizon Air shareholder removed from first class for appearance. The headline exploded across social media. Rebecca Foster received a dozen urgent calls in 5 minutes. Shareholders started demanding a board meeting. The stock dropped 14% before wheels even left the ground. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, the scandal had a name: the 1A incident. In the cabin, passengers now whispered James's name like a confession. The woman who had filmed the removal now uploaded it with the caption, "He didn't raise his voice. He didn't resist." They just couldn't believe someone like him belonged in first class. The video gained 1.2 million views in an hour. James, still seated in the quiet terminal, took a deep breath as the notification pinged. FAA has initiated a preliminary investigation into discriminatory enforcement of boarding procedures on Horizon Air Flight HA456. He turned to Sarah. "That's the first domino. Now we push." She nodded, eyes hard. "We've got the internal override policy, 7 HR complaints, racial profiling tags, deleted seat logs, and now financial fraud. What's next?" James looked straight ahead. "We forced the board to pick, keep the rot, or burn it down and start again." The choice would come sooner than anyone expected. At Horizon Air's corporate headquarters in Dallas, the tension could be felt in the temperature of the boardroom glass. Rebecca Foster, CEO of Horizon Air, stood motionless as the monitor behind her displayed the collapsing stock ticker, HZN, plummeting in real time, down 17%, then 21, then 27. Her palms were sweating, but she didn't wipe them. She was frozen, transfixed, caught between corporate protocol and something much older, fear. Around the long glass conference table, executives murmured in disbelief. Legal had just confirmed the video was real. Not only that, it had been sent directly to the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and a list of press contacts that included CNN, ABC, and The Wall Street Journal. The footage of James Carter being handcuffed while calmly stating his 40% stake in the company was now the lead segment on every network news site. But that wasn't the worst of it. What Rebecca held in her hand. A USB drive just delivered by the Director of Internal Compliance. Contained something far more lethal than humiliation. Evidence of a deliberate override policy. Staff tagging passengers as non-standard appearance and using that to disqualify their seats. Jennifer Brooks had used the override command over 50 times in the past 6 months. In more than 80% of those cases, the passenger in question had been either Black, Latino, or dressed casually. And now, the world knew. A second screen lit up. The FAA's internal memo had leaked. Horizon Air potentially falsified safety compliance and maintenance certifications in parallel to civil rights violations. The boardroom turned to ice. Rebecca turned slowly toward her COO. "Get legal," she whispered. "Get everyone." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away. James Carter sat in a high-rise office overlooking Manhattan, no longer in the terminal but now back in command. Behind him, the skyline was just beginning to turn gold with the setting sun. "Is the report sent to the FAA?" he asked without turning his chair. Sarah, standing behind him, nodded. "Sent with attachments, video, audit trail, override data, HR complaints, and evidence of deferred maintenance falsification. Everything's time-stamped and archived." James nodded slowly, then swiveled to face her. "And the media partners?" "All major networks received embargoed versions. Once the FAA confirms investigation status, it goes public at full throttle." James looked down at his open laptop. The headline on CNN now read, "He didn't look first class. Billionaire investor removed from his own airline's cabin. Horizon Air faces collapse." His eyes moved to the subheading. "Carter expected to pull entire stake." Sarah was watching him closely. "Do you want to confirm it?" James's finger hovered over the send button of an email addressed to Rebecca Foster and the Horizon board. The subject line, "Notice of immediate capital withdrawal, 40% equity redemption." "She'll panic," Sarah said quietly. "Their credit lines are collateralized against your equity." James clicked. "Good," he replied. "Let the system that let this happen feel what it means to lose protection." In Dallas, Rebecca's assistant burst into the boardroom, breathless. "He pulled out," she said. "James Carter just pulled all 40%. A full minute of silence followed, then panic. Phones rang. CFOs shouted into headsets. Legal began emailing emergency SEC notifications. HR began erasing internal Slack messages. Rebecca's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the table. "What happens if we can't meet our liquidity guarantees?" she asked. The answer came from the Director of Treasury. "We default. We collapse. The reserves aren't real. We were floating on his capital buffer." Her voice cracked as she asked, "How long do we have?" "Maybe a day, maybe less." In her private inbox, Rebecca now saw the incoming message from ABC News. "Would you like to comment on the newly revealed override policy and employee complaints?" Beneath that, "FAA confirms preliminary audit. You are named." And beneath that, a message from James himself, simply reading, "You could have stopped her. You chose not to." The room spun. Rebecca lowered herself into the leather chair and whispered, "He's going to destroy us." But by now, destruction was already underway. Michael Turner had just sent the legal department a supplemental disclosure package detailing how Horizon's internal override system allowed unqualified aircraft to fly without completing safety checks. It was connected, indirectly, but clearly, to the same system Jennifer had abused. Sarah published a redacted version online, titled, When discrimination meets negligence, a system that profits from silence. Within an hour. Former employees were commenting. A former mechanic confirmed they were told to skip maintenance if the plane could make it just one more leg. A former flight supervisor posted screenshots of override logs buried after complaints. The house of cards was folding. James Carter watched it all unfold from his office. Calm, centered, unflinching. Once Brightstar issues its formal statement, he told Sarah, we'll announce the new platform. Brightstar Airways? She asked. He nodded. Built from the ground up, transparent, inclusive, and safe. Sarah smiled faintly. They'll hate you for this, James replied without looking up. Let them. Then he closed the laptop and stood. Now it's their turn to sit in silence and watch the sky fall. At JFK's packed media hall, flashbulbs flickered like lightning across a stormy skyline of microphones, notepads, and cold stares. Reporters packed the front rows, murmuring over headlines still hot from the wire. Carter pulls 40%, Horizon faces collapse. At the podium stood a man in sneakers and a plain gray t-shirt. James Carter, unmoved, unbent, and impossibly calm. Behind him stood Sarah Davis and Michael Turner, flanking him like stone guardians. He didn't glance at the crowd. He simply raised a single sheet of paper and began. This is the original override report used by Horizon Air cabin crew to disqualify passengers based on non-standard appearance. He laid the document on the podium like a verdict. It contains codes used to remove customers who didn't look the part. It was used against me, and it's been used against others for years. The room stilled. In the back, someone whispered, "He's really doing it." And he was. James clicked a button on the clicker in his hand. Behind him, a screen came to life. Images flashed. Emails between flight staff discussing appearance-based seating decisions. Audio clips of Jennifer Brooks saying, "First class isn't for people who wear sneakers." Robert Hayes laughing as he called a Latino passenger low priority. Then the screen paused on a still frame. Jennifer pointing toward James in seat 1A. While Officer Thompson approached with handcuffs, "This is what systemic bias looks like," James said evenly. Dressed in policy, covered by uniforms, spoken in polite tones that hide old poison. A reporter near the front raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, what's your goal here? Are you trying to shut Horizon down?" James looked at her. "No," he said. "I'm trying to wake them up. But if they won't wake up, then yes, I'll help shut them down." Murmurs rippled. Behind the podium, Sarah opened a tablet and handed it to him. James read the screen and nodded. "As of this morning, Horizon Air has lost 31% of its shareholder value, over $4 billion in market cap. The FAA has opened a formal investigation, and 3 former employees have come forward confirming maintenance records were altered." The crowd buzzed with tension. Then another hand rose. "What do you want from Horizon now?" "Accountability," he said. "Not a press release, not a lawyer-drafted apology. Real, structural change. And it starts with who's in charge." Then he turned to the side. The door opened. In walked FAA liaison Denise Sharp, followed by Officer Laura Thompson. But she wasn't here to arrest James this time. She stood in uniform, silent. The evidence had reached her command hours ago. She stepped to the podium and opened a folder. Based on recorded testimony, time-stamped overrides, and direct admissions from Horizon staff, she said. The FAA has issued a federal order of removal against 3 crew members, effective immediately. She turned and pointed to the side entrance. Jennifer Brooks, Robert Hayes, Captain David Miller. Gasps shot through the room. Reporters pivoted as the 3 former crew members were led in, their faces pale, lips pursed. Jennifer's eyes darted around the room, then locked on James. She tried to speak, but James raised a hand calmly. "You don't need to say anything," he said. "Everything you already said is out there, and none of it can be taken back." Behind him, the screen showed a live feed of Horizon's board meeting in Dallas. CEO Rebecca Foster appeared on screen, flushed, her voice strained. "We are deeply sorry for the events of Flight HA456, she began, reading from a script. "Effective immediately, we have severed ties with the crew involved." "Too late," a reporter shouted. "You knew for months." "That's right," James said. "They knew, and they did nothing, until the public forced them to." The press surged forward. "Mr. Carter, what happens now?" someone asked. James gave a slow smile. "The first of the day. Now," he said, "we build something better." He stepped aside as the logo of Brightstar Airways appeared behind him. A new carrier, a new code, a new commitment, one that doesn't judge you by what you wear, how you look, or who you are. The room burst into sound, questions, flashes, excitement. But James was already stepping down. He didn't need to say more. Jennifer, Robert, and David were escorted quietly through a side door, their careers, once protected by silence and seniority, now dissolved into the noise of headlines and history, and above them, somewhere over the eastern seaboard, Horizon Air Flight 812 sat grounded due to internal confusion. No crew, no response, no plan. James Carter walked through the lobby of JFK that morning not as a man who'd been dragged off a flight, but as one who had just lifted a nation's eyes to the sky and said, "We can do better." And this time, people were ready to listen. In the hours following the public firings, as the dust of scandal settled into headlines and policy memos, James Carter stood on the tarmac outside a Brightstar hangar in Newark, where the first aircraft bearing the Brightstar Airways logo was being prepared for FAA certification. The paint was still fresh, the turbine blades still wrapped in protective foam, but the mission was clear. "Not just another airline," he told the small press circle beside him. "This is a message to every gate agent, every boardroom, every executive who ever let appearance outweigh identity. Your time is up." Behind him, Sarah Davis scrolled through messages pouring in from across the country. Hundreds of former passengers, many with eerily similar stories, now spoke publicly for the first time. One had been told her afro violated headrest standards. Another had been denied entry to a VIP lounge while wearing cultural attire. The patterns, once ignored, now glowed in bold relief. "They all thought they were alone," Sarah whispered. "Now they know they weren't." At Horizon Air, the unraveling continued. The FAA's emergency audit had uncovered more than bias. It had found systemic negligence buried beneath doctored maintenance logs, deferred inspections, and faked compliance records. A former lead mechanic stepped forward, revealing that cost-saving directives had encouraged crews to bypass checks if a plane felt okay. That single phrase, "felt okay," would appear in 3 different safety reports. The revelation triggered a cascade of consequences. Horizon's top insurer pulled its coverage, 5 more board members resigned, and the airline, once bloated with false confidence, now faced grounding not from protest, but from regulatory force. James watched the news unfold from the hangar conference room. "They didn't just disrespect people," he said to Michael Turner. "They gambled with lives." Michael nodded. "And now they pay." Within 48 hours, the FAA announced a temporary suspension of Horizon's fleet pending investigation. Competitor airlines began absorbing stranded passengers. But it was Brightstar that captured the imagination. James's statement, "We rise not by who we exclude, but by who we welcome," was now trending in 10 languages. Civil rights groups publicly endorsed his efforts, pilots sent resumes, Mechanics volunteered. Kevin Brown, the flight attendant who had stood up mid-flight, was now Bright Star's first director of crew integrity. And inside the Bright Star Training Center, a plaque had already been mounted. Seat 1A belongs to everyone who's ever been told they didn't. Still, James remained grounded, not in defeat, but in resolve. Reform isn't just about policy, he said in a live interview. It's about culture. You can't retrain what people are afraid to admit they believe. He announced a new partnership with HBCUs to train a new generation of aviation professionals, pilots, executives, engineers, who looked like the passengers often ignored. Meanwhile, Bright Star implemented transparency dashboards, allowing passengers to rate not just service, but fairness. Internally, every override action required a verbal justification, recorded and reviewed. If you wouldn't say it into a microphone, James said, you shouldn't be saying it at all. Back at Horizon's crumbling HQ, Rebecca Foster tried to delay the inevitable, but the FAA had spoken. Lawsuits followed, shareholders revolted, and across terminals nationwide, airport displays began flashing a single message in yellow: all Horizon flights canceled. The empire had fallen, but the skies had never looked more open. In the weeks that followed Horizon Air's collapse, the industry staggered through a reckoning it could no longer defer. Headlines no longer asked if discrimination was embedded in air travel. They asked how deep. Congressional hearings convened. Airlines issued rushed statements and updated training protocols. But the public had already moved their loyalty, not just in principle, but in purchase. Bright Star Airways, barely 2 weeks old, had tripled its pre-launch forecasts. It wasn't just a brand. It was a symbol. At its center stood James Carter, no longer just a CEO or investor, but a living challenge to a system that had once cuffed him for daring to sit in the seat he bought. And now, as he stepped into a small auditorium at Howard University to speak before a group of black aviation students, he did so in the same gray t-shirt he had worn that night, unstained, unbent, a quiet reminder. They thought the seat defined the man, he told the students. But what they forgot is that the man defines the system. His words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. In the front row, a young woman wiped tears from her eyes. Behind her, an older man nodded slowly, gripping a folded newspaper with the headline, "Horizon Gone. Hope Rises." Back in New York, Jennifer Brooks had vanished from headlines, but not from consequence. Fired, discredited, and named in a class-action lawsuit. She had attempted to issue a statement of regret, but for those who watched her point a finger while a black man in seat 1A was handcuffed without cause, apologies felt like dust. Robert Hayes and David Miller faced similar fates. Careers ended, reputations unraveled. Horizon's former CEO, Rebecca Foster, had tendered her resignation after being summoned to testify under oath. But none of their falls were celebrated. Not by James, not by Bright Star. Justice isn't revenge, he had said in an early press briefing. It's restoration. What we build matters more than what we tear down. And what he built was real. Pilots of color who once hid their names on rosters now walked tall through terminals. Flight attendants who once feared speaking out now wore uniforms bearing a Bright Star crest woven with the phrase, "Everyone belongs here." And for the first time in U.S. aviation history, a domestic airline offered passengers the option to flag and report service bias, live, in real time, with direct executive review. The change was cultural, it was generational, and it would not be undone. One evening, Sarah Davis asked him quietly, "Do you feel like we won?" James sat still for a long moment. Then he replied, "I don't think this was a win. I think it was a beginning." He stood, walked to the window of his office overlooking the runway, and watched as the first Bright Star flight lifted into the sky. The plane's nose rose slowly, confidently, into the gold-lit dusk, an image he would remember not as victory, but as promise. Because justice, real justice, doesn't land in one flight. It takes off again and again. And this time, it wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't look the part. Everyone who'd been stared at, talked down to, waved aside, or walked past. This legacy wasn't about building an airline. It was about building room, where before there had only been walls. Have you ever been judged by what you wore, how you looked, or where they thought you didn't belong? If this story moved you, don't stay silent. Share your story in the comments and let your voice be part of the change. And if you believe in justice, dignity, and equal seats for all, subscribe and help us keep telling the stories that matter.